A black teen stands trembling in a college lecture hall, his voice silenced, his brilliance mocked by a tenured professor who laughs. Try again when you drop the hood. Students chuckle. The class moves on. No one stands up. No one speaks. But what no one knew was that someone had hit record. And by morning that recording would shatter the university's silence and make him a global name. What he wrote next would burn through every classroom in America, but it almost got him expelled. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. Milton State University looked like a promise. The kind of place where progress lived in stone buildings, where diversity was plastered across every brochure and engraved into every mission statement. But promises meant nothing if no one kept them. 17-year-old Braxton Cole walked into Lecture Hall C, wearing his favorite black hoodie and worn-out sneakers, the ones his mom bought second-hand, but kept spotless with love. His backpack was light, just a notebook, a cracked iPad, and a second-hand linguistics textbook that smelled faintly of someone else's life. He sat near the front, close enough to hear clearly but far enough not to draw too much attention. Braxton had earned his seat at Milton, top of his class in South Atlanta, with a state scholarship and a natural ear for language. He was passionate about how people spoke, how words could both divide and connect, empower and erase. Linguistics wasn't just a subject to him, it was personal. The class was sociolinguistics and language identity, taught by Professor Everett Landon. A white man in his late 50s, Landon had the trimmed beard of someone who quoted philosophers for fun, and a voice that never rose above calm condescension. His blazer was sharp, his shoes shiny, and his ideas untouched by anything resembling empathy.
That morning's topic, dialect and prestige.
Landon stood at the front with a smug smile and chalk dust on his cuffs. Today, he began, we examine why certain dialects carry power, while others are dismissed. Why does the Queen's English receive more respect than, say, Appalachian speech? Or his voice paused just long enough for the tension to hang. Urban vernaculars from certain American regions. The implication was loud. The word urban had done its job. As the class murmured in agreement or confusion, Landon turned to the whiteboard and scribbled 3 phrases. Proper English, accent bias, cultural inferiority complex. Then came the question that changed everything. Why do you think certain dialects are viewed as less intelligent, even when the speakers are just as educated? Braxton's hand shot up before he could overthink it. Landon saw it, hesitated, then nodded. Yes, Mr. Cole. Braxton sat upright. He didn't clear his throat or apologize before speaking. His voice came out with the calm confidence of someone who had been forced to defend it his whole life. Because language is political, he said. Accent discrimination is rooted in power. The dominant group sets the rules, and anything outside that norm gets labeled as uneducated. Even if it's just different, people from marginalized communities like mine adapt their language to survive, not because they're ignorant, but because they weren't expected to be in spaces like this. He could feel it. The stares, the shifting energy in the room. His words hit hard, but so did his voice, thick with Atlanta, full of heritage. And then, silence, followed by the smirk. Professor Landon cocked his head slightly, like he was about to deliver a punchline. Interesting, he said slowly. Though I suppose we should all prepare for academia to be written in. How did you say it? He tilted his voice in exaggerated mimicry. 'Cause they wasn't never meant to be included. A few chuckles. Not many. But enough. Braxton blinked. And let's be honest, Landon added, still grinning. It's a lovely sentiment, but perhaps try again when you've left the hood in Atlanta. The room cracked. Laughter. Uneasy, but real. The professor had turned a serious answer into a joke. A joke at Braxton's expense. Braxton's stomach turned. His face didn't move, but his jaw tightened. He looked around the room, faces looked away. Some uncomfortable, some smirking. No one said anything. Not one person stood up for him. He stared back at Landon, eyes locked but voice silent. Saying anything now would just feed the fire. His hands clenched under the desk. He gathered his things slowly, methodically, while the next student spoke as if nothing had happened. No apology, no correction, just business as usual. He walked out, not storming, not crying, but cracked. The door clicked shut behind him, muffling the voice of the professor who thought he'd won. Outside, the sky had shifted. Overcast. Heavy. He wandered without thinking, past the quad, past the fountain students loved posting on Instagram, and toward a quiet bench near the engineering building. It was always empty there, like the university forgot it existed. He sat down, didn't open his notebook, didn't check his phone. He just sat there. What burned wasn't just the insult. It was the silence. The way no one in that room, not even the ones who clearly felt uncomfortable, had said a word, like his dignity had been a price too high for their comfort. He thought of his mom, of how she had worked 2 jobs, skipped meals, and stayed up late helping him apply for scholarships. Of how proud she was when he got accepted here. And now, he couldn't even tell her what happened. Not yet. He closed his eyes. You don't belong here. That was what they wanted him to believe. Don't give them that. That was what his mother would say. So he pulled out his phone. Started typing. Not a tweet. Not a complaint. Just notes, memories, language, emotion. All of it pouring into his screen, like a dam finally cracked. If they were going to laugh at how he spoke, they'd have to read it first. Behind him, on the other side of the quad, a different moment was unfolding. Layla Hargrove, second year, sat in the corner row of that same lecture hall. She had watched it all happen. Watched the mockery, the silence, the way Braxton's shoulders dropped as he left the room. And her hands had been shaking. But her phone had already been in her lap. And on instinct, not malice, not clout-seeking, just sheer disbelief, she had hit record the moment Professor Landon mimicked Braxton's voice. She hadn't meant to become part of anything. But now, holding that video in her hands, her conscience pulsed louder than her fear. She opened her email app, hovered over the diversity office contact, attached the video. No subject line, no explanation, just a single sentence typed into the body. Is this how we teach now? Layla hit send, but what she didn't know, what even Braxton didn't know, was that this video wasn't going to stay in the inbox for long. Someone else had seen it too, and they weren't going to keep quiet. The professor's racist insult wasn't just caught on video. It's backed by written proof no one was supposed to see. The sky outside Milton State darkened as evening settled, but Layla Hargrove's dorm room remained lit, her laptop screen casting pale blue light across her face. The room was small but tidy, a bookshelf packed with academic texts on race theory and feminism, a corkboard filled with affirmations her mom mailed from home. But tonight, all of it felt distant. Her world had shrunk to the shaky 34-second video file now looping on her screen. She hadn't meant to record it. At least, that's what she told herself. But something about Professor Landon's tone that morning had set her teeth on edge. When he mimicked Braxton's voice, twisting every syllable into a cruel impersonation, her thumb had instinctively hit record. Maybe it was habit. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was guilt. Layla wasn't a stranger to injustice. As a biracial student raised in Connecticut's affluent suburbs, she had often felt too white for one side and too black for the other. Her experiences hadn't been like Braxton's, but she knew the look he wore when he walked out. Shoulders square, lips sealed, pride cracked but not broken. She hadn't said anything in the moment. Neither had anyone else. Now, watching the clip again, her stomach churned. Professor Landon's voice was crystal clear in the recording. Try again when you drop the hood, Mr. Cole. The laughter, the silence, the tension. It was all there. Layla paused the video, took a breath, then played it again. And again. Her cursor hovered over the delete button more times than she could count. Instead, she opened her email. She stared at the to field. Typing slowly, she entered the address. Diversity Affairs at miltonstate.edu. Attached the video file. No subject. No signature. Just a single sentence in the email body. Is this how we teach now? She hit send. Then closed her laptop and turned off the light. But the video didn't stay quiet. Across campus, behind the redwood door of the faculty administrative building, another file was being opened. Professor Everett Landon sat in his office, sipping tea and chuckling over an email thread with his longtime colleague, Dr. Marshall Blakely from the University of Raleigh. The two had exchanged messages for years, sometimes about students, sometimes about policy, often about what they called the degradation of standards. Today's subject? Braxton Cole. In the thread, Landon had typed, "Bright kid, maybe. But if we keep letting these ghetto accents pass for scholarship, we might as well publish mixtapes in the journal." He'd added a laughing emoji, hit send without a second thought. It was a joke to him. A routine exchange between academics who like to think of themselves as gatekeepers of culture, but this time he had copied someone else by mistake. Assistant Provost Dana Fields, a black woman who had already received an anonymous tip about a video involving one of Landon's students. And now she had both, the video and the email. Dana stared at the screen in disbelief, fingers frozen above her keyboard. She had worked for years to implement bias reporting protocols, pushed for faculty accountability. And yet here was raw proof, not just of a public humiliation, but of how easily racism lived behind closed academic doors. She clicked download, saved both files to an encrypted folder, and picked up the phone. The next morning, a quiet panic had begun spreading through the administrative wing of Milton State. Dean Robert Canning stood at the center of it. Canning, a polished man with a practiced smile and a political mind, paced the floor of his office with both hands clenched behind his back. "This cannot get out," he repeated, voice low. "We are weeks away from alumni fundraising and national rankings." Dana sat across from him, expression unreadable. "Are you hearing yourself right now?" she asked. "We're not dismissing this," he said quickly. "We're reviewing it. Quietly. There's a process. A process that protects the professor while leaving the student uninformed." Dean Canning looked toward the window. "You're overreacting." Dana slid a printed copy of the email across the table. "No, I'm responding." But he didn't touch it, just waved his hand dismissively. "Then respond through the proper channels. HR, not headlines. We do this the right way." "The right way," Dana echoed. "Or the safe way?" He didn't answer, just stared back until she gathered her folder and walked out. Meanwhile, Braxton walked to class the next day, unaware that his name had been spoken in private meetings, whispered in hallways, and embedded in email chains carrying red flags. He thought the worst was behind him, until students started looking at him differently. Not cruelly, just curiously. A few girls in the courtyard whispered and glanced at him. A senior he didn't know gave him a subtle nod near the dining hall. He caught someone trying to take his photo between classes. Confused, he checked his phone. No messages, no alerts. But something had shifted. He could feel it. And then he got the text from Layla. "Hey, can we talk? It's about yesterday." Across campus, Professor Landon sat in his office pretending nothing had changed. But something had. His inbox was quieter. His colleagues weren't replying as quickly. And when he walked into the faculty lounge, the room didn't greet him with the same warm tones. He'd heard whispers that someone had filed a report, that a video might be involved. But Landon was confident. He had tenure, reputation. He was the institution. Whatever storm was brewing, it would pass like all the others had. He didn't know that copies of his email were already sitting in 3 different inboxes. He didn't know that a student newspaper had just received a tip. He didn't know that his name had been mentioned in a trending tweet. He didn't know Layla had a plan. That night, in her dorm, Layla opened the video again. She had already sent it to the diversity office. But what good had it done? There was no response. No change.
No justice.
She scrolled through social media, her thumb pausing on an account she followed quietly. Student Uprising Nation, a student-run page with over 300,000 followers dedicated to exposing racism, abuse and silence in academic spaces. She uploaded the video. No caption, no hashtags, just one sentence. "This happened yesterday at Milton State. A black student was mocked by his professor for his accent." She hit post. Within 2 minutes it had 300 views. Within 10 it had 2,000. By midnight it had been shared by a verified account with 1.2 million followers. Layla didn't sleep that night. Neither did Braxton. He woke up to 47 missed calls. And while the internet lit up in rage, the university's first reaction wasn't an apology. It was damage control. They weren't planning to protect Braxton. They were preparing to protect themselves. Behind every elite institution lies a polished system built to silence the victims, not the perpetrators. Morning broke over Milton State University, with a strange kind of quiet, the kind that follows an explosion, but comes before anyone admits something has blown apart. The viral video of Professor Landon mocking Braxton had already crossed 1 million views overnight. Students woke to notifications, reposts, and debates in group chats. The clip spread faster than anyone in the administration expected, and far faster than they were prepared to acknowledge. Yet inside the university's marble-lined administrative tower, the mood wasn't panic, it was strategy. Dean Robert Canning stood at the center of a long conference table, tapping a pen rhythmically, his brows creased, not in concern, but in irritation. Beside him, Vice President of Communications Melissa Reed scrolled through online responses, her nervousness masked behind a diplomatic smile. Assistant Provost Dana Fields, who rarely raised her voice, sat stiff and furious. "We need to start with damage assessment," the dean said, clicking a remote that displayed the frozen video frame on the monitor. Landon mid-smirk. Melissa looked up. "It's already viral. If we respond publicly, we risk making it worse. Our best move is silence." Dana's head snapped toward her. "Silence?" she repeated. "A black student was humiliated in front of a class, and we want to pretend it didn't happen?" Dean Canning raised his hand. "We want to protect the university." "From what?" Dana asked coldly. "Accountability?" Melissa jumped in. "Donors are already calling. Alumni want reassurance. If we launch an investigation now, our rankings, our funding, everything's at risk. And if this blows up even bigger because we did nothing?" Dana pushed back. The dean sighed and said, "We handle it through internal protocol, quietly, by the book." "Your book?" Dana muttered. The decision came quickly. The diversity office would not investigate. The video would be labeled unverified. The professor would not face disciplinary action. No statements would be released. No one would notify Braxton. They would bury it. That afternoon, Layla received an email from the diversity office. Her heart sank before she even opened it. The message read, "Thank you for your submission. At this time, the evidence does not meet the threshold for a formal investigation. Please refrain from sharing sensitive material that may misrepresent university faculty." Layla stared at the screen, disbelief turning into fury. "Misrepresent?" She pulled up the video again. Professor Landon's voice played clearly. "Try again when you drop the hood." There was no misrepresentation. It was truth, and they were choosing to ignore it. Later that night, a message came from an unknown number. "Be careful what you share. It could affect your academic standing." No name, just silence after that. But the message was loud enough. They weren't warning her, they were threatening her. Across campus, Braxton walked into class, unaware of any of this. His phone had been off for 2 days. Too many notifications. Too much noise. He didn't know the video had gone viral. He didn't know the school had seen it and done nothing. He believed, maybe naively, that the university was handling it behind the scenes. He stepped into Landon's lecture with quiet hope for resolution, or at least acknowledgement. Instead, what he got was worse than confrontation. He got normal. Professor Landon stood at the front of the class, writing on the board like nothing had happened. His voice was calm. His notes were neat. His smirk was subtle. "Good morning," he said. "Let's begin with phonetic reductions and informal dialects." Braxton sat in his usual seat, but nothing felt usual. Every glance felt loaded. Every laugh behind him cut deeper, and Landon never looked his way. The silence was more violent than words. Outside the classroom, the video continued to circulate in digital shadows. Students whispered about it in corners of the cafeteria, in late-night group chats, and behind closed doors. But fear had taken root. "I want to repost it," one girl whispered, "but I can't afford to lose my internship." "I support him," another said, "but I don't want to get flagged by the school." One by one, students who had once spoken out went quiet. Posts were deleted. Stories vanished. Anger became anxiety. Even Layla's own friends began to distance themselves. "I can't afford to get dragged into this," one said. "Just let it go." "Let it go?" Layla couldn't forget Braxton's face. The sting in his eyes. The way the entire room stayed silent when he left. She'd followed every protocol, filed her report, trusted the process. And now, she was being silenced, like he had been. Meanwhile, Landon walked the halls, untouched. Still lecturing. Still smiling. Still protected. And then Layla saw something that changed everything. A first-year student commented on a post about the video. "This isn't the first time Landon's done something like this. Ask anyone from last year's class." Layla blinked, her breath caught. "Not the first time?" She messaged the student privately. The reply came quickly. "He did the same thing to a girl last spring." She dropped out. No one did anything then either. It wasn't a one-time mistake. It was a pattern, and Milton State had been burying it for years. That night, Layla didn't sleep. She opened her laptop and searched for the most powerful student media group she knew. National Student Frontline News. a massive student-run social justice platform with hundreds of thousands of followers. She attached the video again, this time with a message. Milton State University is protecting a racist professor. The diversity office has refused to investigate. Please help us expose this. She hovered over the submit button, then clicked. Minutes later, she received a reply. We've been waiting for this. There's more happening at your university than you know. The cover-up ran deeper than she imagined, and Braxton was about to be pulled into a storm far bigger than one professor. When truth goes viral, the line between justice and hate can vanish in seconds. The first 3 hours, after Layla submitted the video to National Student Frontline News, were quiet. The kind of quiet that holds its breath before a landslide. And then it began. The post went live at 2:07 a.m. A grainy clip with a razor-sharp caption. Black student mocked by professor at Milton State. University refused to investigate. Watch. The video spoke for itself. No fancy edit. No commentary. Just the raw moment where Braxton's voice was twisted into a cruel impersonation, followed by laughter, silence, and the weight of complicity. By sunrise it had 500,000 views. By noon it was trending nationwide. By evening it had crossed 5 million. Hashtags like Braxton Speaks, Academic Racism, and Landon Must Go exploded across platforms. Twitter threads dissected the clip. TikToks replayed it with commentary. Instagram stories reposted it with fire emojis and fists in the air. Influencers, authors, and activists all joined the storm. This is why our kids don't feel safe in elite spaces. Mocking a black student's dialect isn't just rude, it's racist. Respect black intellect. Period. But with attention came fire. And fire burns indiscriminately. Professor Everett Landon's name trended for all the wrong reasons. Old videos of his lectures resurfaced. One clip showed him scoffing at ebonics. Another included a backhanded comment about linguistic decay. Within 24 hours, the university shut down its official comment section. The PR office released a generic statement. We are aware of the incident circulating online. Milton State does not condone discrimination of any kind. An internal review is underway. But it was too late. The mob was already moving. Landon's faculty page was taken down. Then someone posted his office number. Then his home address. Then photos of his family blurred. But still dangerous. He had crossed the line, and now, the internet had drawn a new one for him. Meanwhile, Braxton's world flipped. At first he didn't understand why people stared harder in the halls. Why classmates he didn't know nodded at him like they recognized something in his walk. Then his friend Malik ran up to him outside the cafeteria, phone waving in the air. Bro, you're on every feed I got. Braxton frowned. What are you talking about? Malik turned the screen toward him. The clip played. His voice. Landon's smirk. The room's laughter. The sound of his silence. Braxton's stomach dropped. He felt exposed, like someone had stripped the moment of trauma from his memory and broadcast it to strangers. His jaw tightened as he scrolled. Posts, reactions, praise, outrage, and then, comments. Some were beautiful. This young man is a genius. Protect him at all costs. Others were cruel. Crybaby can't handle college. Go back to the hood. And some, even worse, pretended to be neutral. Was it really racist, or just a joke taken too far? Braxton's hands trembled. Back in their 2-bedroom apartment, Sharon Cole stared at her phone in disbelief. She'd just gotten home from her second shift cleaning hospital offices and found her son's face on the evening news. She dropped the grocery bag. Braxton, baby, what is this? He walked out of his room slowly, eyes red from reading 1,000 opinions about his own pain. I didn't post it, Matt. I know you didn't, she said gently. But it's everywhere. People calling, reporters leaving voicemails. I don't know what to say to them. He didn't answer. She stepped closer, voice soft but urgent. You need to lay low, okay? Stay out of the mess. Focus on your classes. Let this storm pass. He looked at her. The storm is my class now. She touched his cheek. Please, don't let this world chew you up before you even get started. Braxton nodded. But he knew he wasn't going to stay silent. The flood of attention didn't stop. His DMs were filled with support from strangers, requests for interviews, and hate from trolls hiding behind fake names. Someone photoshopped him in a mugshot. Someone else shared a screenshot of an old Facebook post of his, mocking his grammar. It was like the world couldn't decide if he was a hero or a threat. Even the professors were divided. One sent him an email, applauding his courage. Another quietly removed him from a group project without explanation. On campus, some students clapped him on the back. Others avoided him like controversy was contagious. Every corner he turned, he could feel it. The weight of viral fame, heavy and inescapable. But through the noise, one moment stayed clear in his memory. Landon's smirk. And that was all the fuel he needed. He went to the library late that night, not to study, but to write. He didn't open social media, didn't check his inbox, didn't look at the interviews people begged him to accept. Instead, he opened a blank Word document, titled it, The Color of Sound, and began typing. Line after line, thought after thought, memory after memory. He wrote about dialect, about why people like him spoke the way they did, about his grandmother's soft Georgia drawl, about how Black English wasn't a mistake. It was a map, a story, a resistance. He wrote about pain, the way the classroom laughter had felt like betrayal, the way silence had carved a canyon between him and the school that claimed to welcome him. He wrote about power, who had it, who protected it, and who was punished for challenging it. His fingers didn't stop for 4 hours. The sun began rising outside the library window before he leaned back, eyes stinging. It wasn't just an essay. It was a reckoning. A fire he could control, a voice no one could twist. As he saved the document, an email notification appeared in the corner of the screen, one he hadn't expected. Subject submission request, the American Linguistic Review. We saw your story. If you've written anything, we'd like to read it. He stared at it stunned. He hadn't told anyone what he was writing. How did they know? And who had sent it? Because someone somewhere was watching him, and they weren't just listening. They were waiting. One night of pain fuels a masterpiece that rewrites what it means to be heard. Braxton didn't sleep after finishing The Color of Sound. The words had poured out of him like heat from a reopened wound, but now that it was done, he felt both lighter and exposed. His eyes burned from hours in front of the screen, yet his fingers still twitched from the adrenaline. What he had written wasn't just an essay, it was a mirror, a voice, a rebellion printed in black and white. He stared at the blinking cursor one last time before saving the file. Then, out of instinct more than confidence, he opened his inbox. That message from the American Linguistic Review was still sitting there, marked unread. The subject line hadn't changed. If you've written anything, we'd like to read it. It was brief. No explanation. No name attached that he recognized. How did they even know about him? He didn't answer the email. Not yet. Instead, he attached the essay to a much smaller audience. The editorial board of the Milton Voice, the university's student-run literary journal. It felt safer, less daunting, like whispering instead of shouting. He clicked send and closed his laptop before doubt could creep in and change his mind. A few buildings away, Dr. Myra Stanton sipped her third cup of black coffee. As one of the only tenured black professors on campus, she'd learned how to navigate Milton State with measured calm and precision. But beneath her composed exterior was a fierce intelligence that had spent decades challenging the system from within. When she saw the subject line in her email, student submission, the color of sound, she expected something well-meaning, maybe rough around the edges. She wasn't prepared for what she read. The essay unraveled like a live wire. Braxton's words flowed with the rawness of lived experience and the sharpness of academic insight. He didn't just write about dialect. He dissected the very bones of power, language, and exclusion. He made the case that Black English wasn't an accident or a failure, but a weapon of survival, born in bondage, sharpened in resistance. His lines carried rhythm, fury, and clarity. Dr. Stanton sat back in her chair after reading it, stunned. Without hesitation, she opened a second tab and forwarded it to a senior editor she knew personally at the American Linguistic Review. In her message, she wrote just 5 words: "You need to publish this." 2 days passed, and Braxton heard nothing. He assumed the essay had either been rejected or ignored, lost in a pile of unread documents. He didn't tell anyone he had submitted it. Not his roommate, not his mother. It felt like too much to share, like saying it aloud might jinx it. Then came the knock. Braxton opened his dorm door to find Dr. Stanton standing outside, in a long gray coat, her expression unreadable. "You Braxton Cole?" she asked. He nodded. "I read your essay," she said, "and I sent it to the American Linguistic Review." His eyes widened. "Wait, what?" She didn't blink. "I don't wait for permission when something deserves to be heard. They responded this morning. They're interested." Braxton's jaw clenched. Stunned. Like, interested how? They want to talk, she said simply. No promises yet. But it's moving. And fast. He didn't know whether to be excited or terrified. But Dr. Stanton's tone made it clear. This wasn't small anymore. Tell your mother, she added before turning to leave. She deserves to know her son just cracked open a whole discipline. While Braxton processed what had just happened, across campus, Professor Landon sat in his office, alone and simmering. He'd watched the backlash unfold, felt the pressure building. His name was a trending topic for days. His inbox was filled with thinly veiled threats and furious messages from parents, former students and faculty peers. But what disturbed him most was the rumor that had started floating through the department. Braxton's essay might be published nationally. Landon clenched his teeth. He had built his entire reputation on being a gatekeeper of intellectual standards. This student, this child, had publicly embarrassed him, and now the academic world was calling him brilliant. He opened a new draft in his email. The subject, concern regarding recent student submission. He wrote, I am contacting the Academic Integrity Board regarding a submission I believe may contain unauthorized academic assistance. There are clear markers of external help. I would like to request a formal inquiry before any publication proceeds. He didn't name Braxton directly, but the intent was clear. He was planting doubt and preparing the trap. Back in his dorm, Braxton sat at his desk, rereading his essay. He still couldn't believe it was being taken seriously by people at the highest level of his field. Every line now felt heavier, like something sacred. He clicked open the new email from the review. Dear Mr. Cole, we were moved and impressed by your essay. We would like to schedule a call to discuss the possibility of publishing your work in our fall edition. His heart pounded. He had done it. He hadn't just survived the mockery. He'd answered it in a language the world couldn't ignore. But as he typed his response, another knock came at his door. This time it wasn't Dr. Stanton, a university official, dressed in a crisp shirt and carrying a sealed envelope, handed it to him without a word. Braxton opened it slowly. Inside was a formal notice from the Academic Integrity Office. Subject: Academic Integrity Review. You are under investigation for potential misconduct regarding a submitted essay. You are advised not to communicate further about this submission until the inquiry is completed. The paper trembled in his hands. Professor Landon hadn't disappeared. He was striking from behind the curtain, and the system was sharpening its knives. The same institution that ignored racism now wants to silence the one exposing it. Braxton sat at his desk staring at the envelope as if it were an intruder in his room. His name was printed neatly across the front, but everything inside felt unreal, almost like a trick meant for someone else. The letter accused him of something so sharp it cut through the air: academic misconduct. It stated that due to concerns regarding authorship, the university was launching a full academic integrity review of his essay, The Color of Sound. Not one mention of the essay's brilliance. Not one acknowledgement of the trauma that birthed it. Not even a footnote about the professor who'd humiliated him. Instead, the burden had been twisted and dropped on his shoulders. He wasn't being celebrated. He was being interrogated. He felt the oxygen shrink in the room. His walls, once covered with notes, sticky reminders, and study timetables, now looked like paper-thin witnesses. He placed the letter on his desk, sat back, and let the truth settle like a heavy weight on his chest. They don't believe I wrote it, he thought. Or worse, they refuse to believe it, not because the essay wasn't his voice, but because his voice wasn't supposed to be capable of that brilliance. It wasn't fraud they suspected. It was excellent. Across campus, Dr. Myra Stanton paced her office with a vein pulsing in her temple. She had seen this tactic before. When institutions couldn't deny racism, they manufactured doubt. When they couldn't attack the truth, they attacked the truth teller. Her phone buzzed with a copy of the same notice Braxton received. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed her coat, stormed out of her office, and headed straight toward the administrative building. She wasn't going to request a meeting. She was going to demand one. Meanwhile, Braxton was escorted into a room that felt more like an interrogation chamber than a meeting space. Gray walls, an empty table, and two officials from the Academic Integrity Committee sat across from him. Their smiles were polite, but cold, their pens poised before he even sat down. They asked if he'd received unauthorized help. They asked if he had written anything of similar complexity before. They asked if he would provide writing samples to validate authorship. The phrasing was gentle, but the intent was venomous. Every question chipped at his dignity. His answers were calm, But his stomach churned. I wrote it myself. Yes, I've written like this before. I will provide whatever you need. Each sentence felt like repeating his own innocence into a void that had already convicted him. What hurt most wasn't the accusation. It was the implication. They believed he wasn't capable of writing something powerful enough to stir a nation. They weren't offended by plagiarism. They were offended by possibility. Later that evening, Sharon sat in their small kitchen, holding the letter as tears formed in her eyes. "They're trying to take everything from you," she whispered. Her son, the boy who stayed up reading textbooks for fun, the boy who turned his trauma into art, was now being punished for the very excellence she raised him to fight for. Braxton stared at the table, fists balled. "I told the truth," he said. Sharon reached for his hands, voice thick. "I know, that's why they're scared, but you don't back down now." The next morning, students whispered again, this time not about the video, but the investigation. Someone leaked the notice, and social media erupted. Hashtag shifted from Braxton speaks to "they want him silent." The comments were explosive. "This is how institutions treat black intellect. He exposes racism. They call it cheating. Investigate the professor, not the student." Influencers joined. Writers shared essays. A well-known poet posted a clip saying Braxton Cole is the kind of voice academia fears because it cannot control him. And then something unexpected happened. During a live panel discussion on educational justice in Washington, D.C., Dr. Kenya Barron, one of the most respected cultural theorists in the country, paused mid-answer when the moderator mentioned the case. "I know that name," she said softly. The audience leaned forward. I read The Color of Sound. It shook me. She looked into the cameras. If Milton State is investigating that young man for telling the truth, then maybe it is Milton State that should be under review. By evening, clips of her statement were viral. By morning, Braxton received a direct message from her. "If you need a platform, a lawyer or protection, say the word. You are not alone." It was the first moment in days where hope didn't feel like a fragile thing. Across campus, Landon watched everything unfold from behind his office door. The blowback scared him now. Students avoided him. Faculty scrutinized him. A few had even turned their backs entirely. He felt his grip slipping, and the rumor that Braxton's essay was under review for national publication only ignited his desperation. He had wanted to slow Braxton down, not catalyze a movement around him. But instead, the more he pushed, the more attention the student received. His career was now dangling over a fire he had set himself, and the idea that a freshman might destroy him terrified him beyond reason. But he wasn't finished fighting. In the dark of his office, he pulled out his phone and typed a message nobody would ever see publicly. Someone off campus, someone who had helped him navigate scandals before. "I need this handled. Quietly," he wrote. "The student's rise needs to be reconsidered." The message was cryptic, chilling, and illegal, but he sent it anyway. Back on campus, students began gathering in clusters. A sit-in formed outside the administration building, peaceful but powerful. Signs read, "Trust black voices," "Excellence isn't cheating," and "Listen to students, not silence them." Faculty allies began circulating a petition defending Braxton's authorship. Within hours, professors from universities across the nation added their names. Braxton didn't ask for any of it, and yet here it was, a community he didn't know existed standing with him. Through the noise, Dr. Stanton fought even harder. She leaked internal documents showing the university had ignored previous complaints about Landon. She emailed major journalists. She brought the truth into light, because she knew systems like Milton State only changed when someone dragged them into the open, kicking and screaming. By nightfall, Braxton received another message, but this time not from a professor or activist. It was from the office of Congresswoman Alana Rivers, a national advocate for educational reform. "We've reviewed your essay. We've reviewed your case. We would like you to speak on Capitol Hill about linguistic discrimination. Are you willing to testify?" Braxton read the email twice, 3 times. His breath caught in his throat. His essay, born out of humiliation, was now echoing in halls of power. His story had traveled beyond campus, beyond the state, beyond anything he imagined. But before he could even respond, his phone buzzed again with a blocked number. He opened the text. "Stop. Before you make a mistake you can't reverse." He felt his chest tighten. Somewhere in the shadows of the institution that tried to silence him, someone had decided they weren't done hunting him. And this time, the threat wasn't coming from the university. It was coming from someone far more dangerous. When one brave voice is threatened, another rises louder. Myra Stanton had never been one for headlines. She preferred footnotes, literature reviews, and teaching moments that stuck quietly in the minds of her students. But silence had never been safety, not in the halls of Milton State, and certainly not now. When she read the letter accusing Braxton of academic dishonesty, she didn't just feel disgust, she felt rage. She had watched the system contort itself for years to defend mediocrity in white coats, while punishing genius in black skin. This wasn't unfamiliar, this was textbook, so she spoke. It began with a simple public statement, recorded on her phone and uploaded to her social media with no filters, no captions, just truth. Let's be clear, she said into the lens, eyes firm, voice unwavering. Braxton Cole is being punished not because his work lacks merit, but because it carries more merit than the institution is comfortable acknowledging. The claim of plagiarism is not just baseless, it's racist. The video hit a nerve. Within hours it was shared by colleagues, then by faculty in other universities, and soon by academics across disciplines. Stanton's voice, once confined to conference panels and peer-reviewed journals, had ignited something much larger, a reckoning within academia itself. The next wave came swiftly. Dr. Alfonso Mendoza, a renowned linguist from UCLA, issued a joint letter of support with 3 other major figures in the field. It was titled "We Know That Voice," a collective defense of Braxton Cole. Dozens signed. By the end of the week, over 400 scholars had added their names. Harvard, Columbia, Spelman, and Stanford were all represented. Each signature carried weight. Each paragraph of the letter struck with academic precision. To question the authorship of such a piece, not based on evidence but on perceived sophistication, is to admit a bias that equates black brilliance with improbability. The letter was published on multiple platforms and covered in The Atlantic, Inside Higher Ed, and even mentioned in passing by Anderson Cooper during a late-night segment on institutional gatekeeping. Under the weight of national attention, Milton State's Academic Review Board began to fracture. Internally, arguments erupted. A handful of members pushed for immediate closure of the investigation. Others scrambled to salvage neutrality. But pressure has a way of exposing what institutions try hardest to hide, and Milton State was cracking. Meanwhile, Professor Everett Landon was unraveling. The same smirk that once emboldened him now seemed frozen in place. Fragile and false. He watched his inbox flood with criticism from former colleagues and alumni. He scrolled Twitter under an anonymous burner account, reading post after post calling for his resignation. And then it got worse. The email he thought had been buried, the one where he joked about ghetto speech in reference to Braxton, resurfaced. This time not just on campus gossip threads, but in national press. The New York Times ran a piece titled, "When Language Becomes a Weapon, Racism in the Ivory Tower." Landon's quote was front and center. He tried to spin it, claimed it was taken out of context, hired a PR consultant. But the court of public opinion had long moved past sympathy for professors who mocked their students, and his legacy, once so carefully constructed, was now sinking in real time. Across campus, Braxton stayed mostly silent. He read the articles. He saw the protests. He watched the faculty war from behind his dorm door. But he hadn't spoken. Not because he didn't want to, but because, for once, he wanted to choose how his story would be told. He remembered what his mother said. "Don't let this world chew you up before you've told your truth." So one night, he borrowed Malik's camera and sat down in front of a blank wall. No backdrop, no script, just himself. He hit record. "My name is Braxton Cole," he began, voice steady, "and I wrote The Color of Sound with my own hands, with my own breath, and with everything this university tried to erase in me." He talked about Landon, about the classroom, about how being mocked wasn't even the worst part. It was the silence that followed. He talked about how every system he believed in tried to prove that someone like him couldn't be brilliant, couldn't be powerful, couldn't belong. He paused. "Maybe I wasn't supposed to write that essay," he said, "but I did, and now that it's out there, you don't get to silence me." He ended with the words that would later be quoted across the country. "If you think my voice doesn't belong in your world, then maybe it's your world that needs changing." He posted the video to his new account. Within 3 hours, it crossed 1 million views. By the next day, it had been reposted by Oprah. News anchors called it the most important video on education since George Floyd's protests reignited institutional reflection. Teachers from rural schools and urban districts emailed him, saying they played the video for their students. Children sent him handwritten letters. One simply said, "I sound like you. Thank you for making me proud of it." Braxton sat alone in his room that night reading message after message, tears silently running down his cheeks. He didn't reply to them all. He couldn't. But he read every single one, and just when he thought the tide had finally calmed, his phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. A calm, professional voice greeted him. "Mr. Cole, this is Taylor Bergman, editor-in-chief of the American Linguistic Review. I've read your essay 4 times. We'd like to make a formal offer not just to publish it, but to feature it as the cover piece of our next issue." Braxton was speechless. "We believe your essay will redefine how this generation understands voice, power, and language," Bergman continued, "and we want to stand behind it." Braxton swallowed hard. "I thank you. I don't even know what to say." "Say yes," Taylor replied warmly. He did, and the room fell silent after the call ended. Silent but different. Not heavy, not suffocating. It was the kind of silence that comes before thunder, before change, before history. And as his inbox began to flood with new offers, book deals, TEDx invitations, international journals, one email stood out from the rest. Subject: translation rights inquiry. "We would like to publish The Color of Sound globally. Please confirm language preferences." So far, we have requests in 7 countries. Braxton leaned back in his chair. His voice had crossed oceans now, and he knew this wasn't just about him anymore. It had become something much bigger. What began as classroom mockery becomes a movement in every corner of the world. When the American Linguistic Review published its October edition, Braxton Cole's name wasn't just inside the journal, it was on its cover. His essay, The Color of Sound, wasn't buried beneath jargon or tucked into academic obscurity. It opened the issue. It demanded to be read. The journal, long known for its dense high-theory publications, chose instead a stark, minimalist cover. No art, no graphs, just the essay's title and the author's name. It was a deliberate choice, a declaration. Within days, the essay was everywhere. Professors printed it out and pinned it on department boards. Students reposted screenshots. Teachers in high schools from Oakland to Boston reached out to Braxton asking permission to teach it in class. He started receiving emails from universities asking him to speak, including one from Oxford. The invitations came faster than he could read them. Some were from media outlets. PBS, NPR, and MSNBC wanted interviews. A Netflix producer requested a call. 2 publishers sent early book offers. Braxton sat at his desk, barely able to keep up with the tidal wave of attention, but none of it hit him as hard as the people, especially the students. It started with a tweet. A girl from New Orleans posted, "When I read The Color of Sound, I saw myself, for the first time in school. I wasn't ashamed of how I speak." She used the hashtag #BraxtonWasMe. The tag caught on. Soon it was everywhere. Thousands of black students began sharing their stories, being told they were too loud, too ghetto, too urban to succeed. One student wrote, "They made fun of me in debate for saying finna, but I got accepted into Yale." Braxton's words reminded me why I never changed. A video from a Chicago high schooler went viral when he said, "I used to stay quiet in class because teachers laughed at my accent, but reading Braxton's essay, it made me want to speak up again." The movement spread beyond schools. Kendrick Lamar quoted a line from the essay during a live show in Atlanta. Viola Davis called it required reading for every educator in America. A spoken-word remix of Braxton's most powerful quotes over protest footage exploded on TikTok, viewed millions of times. The media dubbed it a cultural awakening sparked by a freshman's pen. Yet, through it all, Braxton didn't capitalize on the moment. He didn't start a YouTube channel or sell t-shirts. He kept going to class, kept wearing his hoodies and jeans, kept reading, writing, thinking. But something shifted around him. Some classmates stopped making eye contact. A few professors, previously friendly, became distant. One suggested he consider taking a gap year to manage his visibility. Braxton shrugged it off at first. Then he noticed the subtle isolation, the awkward silences in group projects, the way people now treated him more like a headline than a person. And then there was his mom. At first, Sharon was radiant with pride. She recorded every mention of him on TV, clipped every article, and bragged to anyone who'd listen. But slowly, the stress began to show. A few strange letters arrived at their apartment, one with no return address, containing only a ripped photo of Braxton, and the word liar in red ink. Sharon never told him about it. She simply threw it away and double-locked the door that night. But the weight of it began to settle on her. She became quieter, more tired. When Braxton asked if she was okay, she waved him off. "I'm just tired, baby," she said. But he noticed the uneaten food, the unopened bills, the subtle way her hands trembled. One morning, he found her sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at her coffee. "Ma?" he said. She looked up too quickly, forced a smile. "You got an interview today, don't you? Don't worry about me." But Braxton didn't feel right. Something was wrong. Sharon placed her hand on his and said, "Don't let this world change you. Even when they cheer you on, even when they celebrate you, they might still want to own your voice. Protect it." He nodded, heart tightening, but didn't press further. She had always been his rock. He never imagined she could be shaken. While Sharon suffered quietly, the world kept praising her son. Landon had disappeared. The university released a vague statement about a mutual separation and began quietly implementing reforms to faculty review and diversity training. No apology, no direct acknowledgement of wrongdoing, just quiet policy changes to cover their tracks. Some called it a victory. Braxton didn't. He knew the same systems that pushed him out would gladly use his name once it was safe. But he also knew his essay was untouchable now. It lived outside their reach. Then came the global attention. The essay was translated into French, Spanish, German, Portuguese, and Zulu. UNESCO requested to feature it in its linguistic equity curriculum. A best-selling author asked Braxton to co-write a book. His inbox became a war zone of requests, interviews, invitations, panels. Everyone wanted a piece of his story. And every time he accepted an offer, a new pressure followed. He began sleeping less, writing less, speaking more. His days filled with phone calls and flights. He smiled for cameras. He gave speeches. But at night, something inside him ached. He never wanted fame. He wanted fairness. And now even justice felt like a performance. Then, one night, after returning from a speaking event in D.C., he entered the apartment and noticed the silence. Sharon wasn't home. At first he figured she was at work or running errands. But hours passed. No call. No text. Then he saw the envelope on the kitchen table, handwritten in her familiar cursive. He opened it slowly. "I need a break from the noise, baby. I'm okay, but I need space. Don't try to find me. Just keep going. Keep speaking. I'll be proud of you wherever I am." Braxton dropped into a chair, the note trembling in his hand. His mother was gone, and the noise, the one he had learned to survive, the one he had turned into music, had taken something from him he couldn't afford to lose. Fame had elevated his voice, but it had also emptied the room. And now, for the first time since he fought back, Braxton would have to face what it meant to lead a movement without the one person who always stood behind him. Behind every rising star is a parent carrying the weight of survival. Sharon Cole had always known the world would be cruel to her son. But knowing and witnessing were two very different things. As Braxton's name blazed across screens and headlines, as hashtags erupted in his honor and protests echoed his words, Sharon felt herself sinking under a tide of dread no camera could capture. Every interview request, every social media tag, every stranger who emailed her asking for a quote about her brave son, they all brought with them the same haunting thought. They're building him up so they can tear him down. The mailbox filled daily with letters. Some kind, others venomous. One envelope was addressed to the mother of the uppity kid. Inside was a handwritten note, in shaky capital letters. "You failed him. Now the world will finish the job." Sharon burned that one in the sink, tears rolling silently as smoke curled to the ceiling. She stopped answering unknown numbers, blocked dozens of email addresses. But the fear couldn't be blocked. It followed her like a shadow. When she went to the grocery store, she watched every glance. When a car slowed near her driveway, she noted the plate. When a package arrived without a name, she let it sit untouched for hours before daring to bring it inside. She tried to smile when Braxton called, told him she was proud, told him the world needed his voice. But at night, when the house was quiet, she sat at the kitchen table with her head in her hands, whispering prayers into the silence. One morning, the silence shattered. It was a Saturday. The sun hadn't risen yet. Sharon stepped outside to pick up the newspaper and froze. Spray painted across the garage in thick black letters were the words, "Speak again and die." The garage door, the driveway, even the mailbox were marked with racial slurs and crude symbols. Her hands shook so hard the paper slipped from her grasp. She called the police. They came eventually. Took pictures. Wrote a report. But the officer's tone was flat. Almost bored. Could be kids, he said. Probably just trying to scare you. Isn't that still a crime? Sharon asked. Her voice brittle. The officer shrugged. We'll keep an eye out. That night she slept with a baseball bat beside the bed. The next day, she called Braxton. Told him everything. Every word. Every brushstroke of hate. His silence on the phone was long, heavy. And then he said, I'll come home. No, she said immediately. Tears in her voice. You stay where you are. You stay safe. But if they're threatening you, then let them threaten me, she said. I can take it. But I won't let them break you. She hung up before her fear became sobs. Days passed. The news cycle moved on. But the tension in Sharon's home did not. She installed new locks, bought cameras, slept with one eye open. And yet, the real battle was inside her. She remembered her own childhood, how teachers called her difficult for asking questions, how classmates mocked her southern accent until she forced herself to speak without it, how her high school counselor told her to aim for secretarial work instead of college. The pain Braxton was enduring wasn't new, it was inherited, and that inheritance was tearing her apart. One evening as she sat on the porch clutching her mug like an anchor, Braxton called again. She didn't even say hello. She just said, I'm scared, baby. I know, Ma. You don't understand. I look at you on those stages, and all I see is a target. I can't stop now, he said gently. This is bigger than us. It's not bigger than you getting hurt, she snapped. It's not bigger than you being alive. For the first time she begged. Truly begged. Please, Braxton. Walk away. Before this takes everything from you. There was silence on the line. And then quietly, I'll think about it. It wasn't a promise, but it was the closest she'd get. That night she fell asleep on the couch with the TV still glowing. Around 10:30, a soft knock at the door stirred her, not the frantic banging of police, not the pounding of threat. A quiet, purposeful knock. She rose cautiously, heart racing, and peeked through the curtain. A woman stood on the porch. Mid-40s, black, professionally dressed, not a reporter, not a stranger, someone who looked like she didn't belong to fear. Sharon cracked the door. Can I help you? The woman smiled softly. Ms. Cole? I'm Dr. Myra Stanton. I work in education equity and policy. May I come in? Sharon hesitated, then nodded slowly. Inside, over a warm cup of tea, Dr. Stanton got to the point. I'm here on behalf of a group of educators and advocates. We're working to create a national platform around linguistic justice policies, protections, reform. Your son's work is the foundation. Sharon blinked, confused. You want him to keep going? Dr. Stanton met her eyes. We want him to help shape the future, but more importantly, we want to protect him while he does. Sharon looked down at her shaking hands. I don't know if he'll survive this. Dr. Stanton leaned in. What if we built something that meant he didn't have to do it alone? Before Sharon could answer, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. She opened it and gasped. The photo was of Braxton, walking alone in Geneva. The caption read, He's never out of sight. The same academic world that once mocked him now rolls out a red carpet. For most of his life, Braxton Cole had watched the academic elite from the outside, peering through the glass as names like Harvard, Yale, and Columbia floated past him in brochures and headlines. They weren't meant for students like him, not boys from East Atlanta with mothers who work double shifts and a voice shaped by Southern rhythm. They were places where professors like Landon spoke in code, where words like articulate were knives disguised as compliments. Now those very institutions were calling. It began with a formal letter from Harvard's Institute of Educational Equity. The language was stiff but reverent, almost nervous. Mr. Cole, your work has challenged how we perceive linguistic identity and its racialization. We would be honored to host you as a featured speaker at our global forum on language and justice. The letter was followed by a phone call, then another. Yale wanted him to join a panel titled Power, Speech and the Pedagogy of Resistance. Princeton asked him to co-author a curriculum module. Georgetown's law school wanted his perspective on code switching and the First Amendment. Each day, his inbox read like a dream. But Braxton didn't see it that way. He saw it as a reckoning. He remembered walking into Landon's classroom on his first day and feeling the heat of invisible judgment the moment he opened his mouth. He remembered the laughter, the way Landon's words, "Try again when you drop the hood," landed like a slap wrapped in a smirk. Now the same halls that once mocked his speech were naming lectures after it. The irony wasn't lost on him. But the justice wasn't complete either. He agreed to attend both Harvard and Yale's conferences, but under one condition: he would not sanitize his message. He wouldn't clean up the truths that made them uncomfortable. If they wanted his voice, they would get it. Southern drawl, sharp analysis, righteous anger and all. At the Harvard Forum, Braxton took the stage before a packed auditorium. Professors, students, and policymakers leaned in as he stepped to the podium. No teleprompter, no speechwriter, just his story and the fire that shaped it. "I was told," he began, "that my voice didn't belong in academic spaces, that my cadence was a distraction, that my words were somehow less scholarly because they didn't wear a tuxedo." He paused, let the silence hang. "But I've learned," he continued, "that sound is shaped by survival, and survival, where I come from, is its own kind of scholarship." The crowd erupted. A standing ovation. But not everyone clapped. As Braxton exited the stage, a professor from the back row muttered to a colleague, "Powerful, but too political." It didn't bother Braxton. He had heard worse. What mattered was that a boy once ridiculed for sounding wrong had just rewritten the tone of the entire room. Soon after, he was invited to co-author papers with some of the top linguists in the country. Dr. Myra Stanton stood proudly beside him as they submitted a joint paper titled "Voice as Resistance: The Role of Black Speech in Academic Liberation." The paper was immediately accepted into a peer-reviewed journal. Another collaboration focused on the erasure of black dialects in standardized testing. Each project positioned Braxton not as a case study, but as a scholar, not a token but a teacher. Meanwhile, the pressure on Milton State University continued to mount. Faculty organized quietly at first, circulating letters and gathering signatures. But the tide became public when students began protesting the university's handling of Braxton's case. Their chant was simple but devastating. "He rose. You hid." Eventually, under a wave of internal resistance and external shame, Professor Everett Landon resigned. The university released a sterile, carefully worded statement, thanking him for his years of service and commitment to academic excellence. But students weren't fooled. The real reason for his departure had already been documented, shared, tweeted, and archived. Braxton didn't celebrate. He didn't comment. He simply moved forward. The essay that started it all continued to spread. The Color of Sound was now officially part of the national high school curriculum in California, Illinois, and New York. It appeared in English and social studies textbooks, often accompanied by essays from Maya Angelou and James Baldwin. A group of high school seniors in Oakland created a mural on their school wall with a quote from Braxton's essay, "My voice carries generations. Don't ask it to whisper." He visited the school unannounced one afternoon, standing before the mural with wide eyes and a stunned silence. When the students realized who he was, they surrounded him with hugs, questions, and shaky cell phone cameras. "You changed how I see myself," one girl whispered, tears in her eyes. "Thank you." In that moment, it hit him fully. Not the fame, not the influence, but the responsibility. His voice was no longer his alone. It carried others now. For the first time in months, Braxton felt a sliver of peace. The storm had quieted. The stage had changed. And though his mother still hadn't returned, he held on to her last note, like scripture. "Keep speaking. I'll be proud of you wherever I am." But peace, he would soon learn, was temporary. It came in a plain brown package, sitting unmarked on the front steps of his apartment. No postage, no return label, just his name, written in black marker. Braxton paused before picking it up. A chill ran down his spine. He carried it inside slowly, placed it on the kitchen table, and opened it with deliberate caution. Inside was a single cassette tape. Old school, no note, no instructions. He didn't own a cassette player, but Malik did. That night, they sat together in the dorm room. The player balanced between them like a relic. The tape hissed as it began to play. Then came a voice, distorted, masked, but deliberate. "You think the story ends with applause?" the voice said. "You think exposing one professor changes the system?" Braxton's heart pounded. "You've become a mouthpiece for people who will use you and forget you. And when they do, we'll still be here." The tape clicked off. Silence. No signature. No identity. Just a warning. Braxton sat frozen, the weight of the moment pressing down on his chest like lead. What he thought was a victory was only chapter 1. Someone was watching. Someone who hadn't forgotten. And they weren't finished yet. For every win in the spotlight, there's a shadow behind the curtain. The cassette tape hadn't even cooled from playback before something darker crept into Braxton's world. 2 mornings later, he returned from class to find a small off-white envelope slid under the front door of his apartment. There was no postage, no sender information, just his name in all caps, jagged ink, and uneven strokes that looked like they'd been carved instead of written. The handwriting carried a venom that was almost physical. Braxton froze. The silence in the hallway amplified the thudding of his heart. He bent down, picked up the envelope, and stared at it for a moment too long before stepping inside. He laid it on the kitchen table, sat across from it, and took a breath. Whatever was inside, it wasn't going to be good. Still, he opened it with the slow mechanical precision of someone defusing a bomb. Inside were 3 sheets of paper. The first was a photo, him, mid-speech at Harvard, captured from an audience member's perspective. His mouth open mid-sentence, hands gesturing. Across the printed image, scrawled in red ink, were the words, "Know your place." Thick, angry lines etched each letter. The second page was filled edge to edge with racial slurs, typeset, handwritten, some capitalized, others underlined, layered so violently that the words practically shouted from the page. And the third was a single typed sentence. "You've been warned. This world wasn't built for your voice. Stay quiet, or stay gone." Braxton sat back in his chair, the papers trembling in his hand. Not even the words themselves terrified him. He'd heard worse growing up in East Atlanta. It was the calculation behind it. Someone had followed his speeches, watched from the crowd, printed photos, slipped past his door. This wasn't a random internet troll. This was someone who wanted to be close. Someone who had gotten close. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed his phone, snapped photos of the contents, and marched to campus security. But the reaction was anything but urgent. The officer on duty glanced at the envelope like it was a parking ticket. A white man, older, with thinning hair and a badge that said supervisor, squinted at the photo of Braxton with "Know your place" scrawled across it. Then shrugged. "We see stuff like this sometimes," he said dismissively. "People get bold online, or they drop off weird things. It's probably just some kid trying to scare you." "I was threatened," Braxton said, jaw locked. "We'll file it," the officer replied, already reaching for a manila folder. "But unless there's a direct threat of violence or an identified source, it's not considered credible." "So you're saying it's not serious?" "I'm saying it's not actionable. That's different." Braxton left that office feeling smaller than he had when he walked in. Not because he was afraid, but because once again, the system built to protect him didn't see him as worth protecting. His essay had cracked open conversations around justice and language. But now, the real language, the language of power, was revealing itself. Indifferent. That evening, he told Sharon. She came over in a rush, her hands shaking before she even took off her coat. When she saw the envelope on the table, already resealed, she didn't open it. She just looked at Braxton, with a fury braided with terror. "You're telling me someone was at your door, and they did this?" she asked. He nodded calmly, like the fear had already burned out, and only ash remained. Sharon broke. Her voice trembled. I told you this world don't like loud black boys, no matter how smart they are. You think just 'cause they put your name in a journal you're safe?" Her eyes filled with tears. "They don't see your degrees. They see your skin." She sat down and buried her face in her hands. "I gave you everything I had to get you here. I never imagined here would be what hurt you." Braxton crouched beside her. "I'm okay, ma." "No," she said, pulling back. "No, you're not, and neither am I." He tried to reassure her, to tell her he was safe, that the school would do something. But even as the words left his mouth, he didn't believe them. They felt like borrowed hope. The next morning, he woke up to find his name trending online again. But for the wrong reason. A deepfake video had surfaced. In it, Braxton appeared to be giving a private speech to a small group, claiming that white students should be quiet and listen for once. The clip was well edited, convincingly lip-synced, and captioned with inflammatory hashtags. Within hours, conservative media picked it up. A popular podcast host called him the face of reverse racism. Thousands of comments poured in, death threats, hate mail, calls for his scholarship to be revoked. Someone tweeted a list of universities that should ban him from ever speaking again. Braxton scrambled to respond. He posted the original unedited footage from the real event. It proved the video was fake, edited, a lie, but it didn't matter. The damage had already seeped into the conversation. In the digital age, truth moved slower than outrage. His inbox flooded again. His phone vibrated endlessly. Friends warned him to take a break, disappear for a while. One suggested, let it blow over. But Braxton couldn't disappear. He had worked too hard to be seen. Still, the fear began to shape his days. He double-checked every lock, watched every face in the crowd, jumped when he heard footsteps behind him. He moved like someone bracing for a hit that hadn't landed yet, but knew it was coming. And yet, he didn't stop. He kept attending conferences, giving lectures, mentoring young students. He wore his vulnerability like armor. But his mind never stopped scanning for shadows. Then, one afternoon, a package arrived at his door. This one different. It was clean, professional, gold letterhead, and marked confidential. Inside was a letter from the Human Rights Institute of Geneva, inviting Braxton to join them as a resident fellow, a 1-year program, all expenses paid, security provided, a chance to focus on his work in a protected international space. The letter praised his voice as transformative in the fight for global justice. It was, in every way, the kind of offer that changed lives, and maybe in Braxton's case saved one. He read it twice, 3 times. Then he placed the letter on the table and stared at it for a long time. Across from him sat the remnants of the threat. The envelope, the slurs, the deepfake that still floated on the internet. The hate hadn't stopped, but maybe this was a way out, a way forward. He didn't know if accepting the offer meant giving up or leveling up. He didn't know if it meant escape or evolution. But just as he reached for his phone to respond, it buzzed. A new message. No contact name. No context. If you leave, the truth leaves with you. Braxton stared at the screen, heart pounding. Someone still wanted him scared. Someone still watching. And now, as opportunity stood before him like an open door, Braxton had to ask himself a question no young voice should ever face. Does the truth still speak if its speaker disappears? What was mocked in a classroom now echoes through the halls of international power. What began as a mocking laugh in a lecture hall had now thundered into the global stage. Braxton Cole, once dismissed for speaking in a southern drawl, now stood as a living symbol of resistance and brilliance. His words had traveled further than his footsteps ever had, and the world was listening. The invitation from UNESCO arrived printed on thick, cream-colored paper embossed with gold, and bearing the official seal of the United Nations. At first Braxton thought it was a mistake, but as he read and reread the letter, his chest tightened with realization. They wanted him to speak, not as a victim of injustice, but as a thought leader on racial linguistics and equity. They were giving him a panel, a global broadcast, an audience made up of world leaders, diplomats, educators, and human rights activists. He stood alone in his apartment, staring at the letter with trembling hands. Sharon's note. Her final message still lay folded neatly on his bookshelf. Keep speaking. I'll be proud of you wherever I am. He whispered those words back to himself as he packed his bag for Geneva. The moment he entered the United Nations chamber, he felt the weight of history pressing down on his shoulders. Flags from every country draped the walls. Journalists clicked cameras with quiet urgency. Delegates murmured in every language imaginable. And when Braxton stepped onto the stage, the room grew still. There was no teleprompter, no prepared script, just a young black man with a voice that had once been silenced, but could no longer be ignored. He began slowly. When I was 17, a professor told me to drop the hood if I wanted to be heard. His voice didn't waver, but I didn't drop it. I carried it with me, because my voice is not a mistake. It's history, it's community, it's survival. Every translator paused for a beat before repeating his words. The weight of what he said didn't need interpretation. It was universal. He spoke of African American vernacular English being criminalized in U.S. classrooms, of marginalized dialects being seen as ignorance instead of culture. He referenced studies from Brazil, Nigeria, India, showing how colonialism still policed the tongues of the oppressed. Every sentence wove data with lived truth. Every word rang out like a bell. When he finished, the entire chamber stood. Applause erupted, not out of politeness, but because they had just witnessed something electric. The speech went viral across continents. News networks broadcast it in prime time. Hashtags surged globally. Voice is power, Braxton speaks, and the now international accent is not ignorance. Braxton didn't just go viral. He became part of the curriculum in countries he had never stepped foot in. A school in Nairobi made the color of sound required reading. A university in Johannesburg created a course inspired by his message. In São Paulo, students painted a mural with his quote, "Don't mistake silence for acceptance. We were just waiting for the mic."
Paris came next.
He was invited to give a keynote on language and power. The city buzzed with press coverage. Braxton, still only 19, walked through cobblestone streets beside scholars, musicians and poets who told him they had waited their whole lives to hear someone like him. That night, from a hotel balcony overlooking the sign, Braxton stood quietly and looked at the lights flickering across the river. He pulled Sharon's note from his pocket again. "I wish you could see this, Ma," he whispered. "You'd laugh at how fancy this place is, but I still hear your voice louder than any of theirs." For once he allowed himself peace. No emails, no notifications, no interviews, just wind and reflection. But peace, he was learning, was temporary. As he returned from dinner with French activists, the hotel concierge stopped him. "Monsieur Cole," she said, hesitantly. "A man came by, said he was a friend from America. He left this for you." She handed him a small envelope. No stamp, no return address. Just his name, written neatly. Upstairs, Braxton opened it slowly. Inside was a single typed sentence. "You can run, but roots always rise." There was no name, no contact info. But the message was clear. Someone knew where he was. Someone had followed him across borders. Back in America, someone from Braxton's past had returned, and they weren't looking to celebrate. They were ready to confront. What if the villain wasn't the only one hiding something? Layla Hargrove hadn't slept through the night in months. Every morning she awoke with the weight of something unspoken pressing down on her chest. The kind of weight that can't be shaken off with coffee or distraction. She had become a ghost in her own story, watching Braxton's journey unfold from afar, reading articles about him, seeing clips of his speeches, and recognizing the ripple effects of a video she had captured, but never truly owned. The world hailed Braxton Cole as a voice for the voiceless, but Layla knew that before his voice could be heard, it had first been recorded by her, and then she had disappeared. When the video first exploded online, she told herself it was enough, that the footage alone was her contribution, that exposing Landon's words was her act of courage. But silence, she learned, is not always neutral. Sometimes silence sides with power, and Layla had been silent for far too long. It wasn't guilt alone that haunted her. It was knowledge, information she had buried, memories she had buried deeper. Because Professor Landon's cruelty toward Braxton wasn't an isolated moment. Layla had seen it before, years earlier, in a smaller classroom, in a quieter scandal that never made it to camera. She still remembered the boy, Avery Mitchell, freshman, soft-spoken, black. He had stood to answer a question about colonial linguistics, referencing a Caribbean dialect spoken by his grandmother. Landon had laughed then too, but it had been colder, sharper. "Next time, bring a translator," Landon had sneered. The room had gone silent. No one had moved. No one had spoken up. And Avery had never returned to that class. Layla remembered seeing him a few days later in the dining hall, avoiding eye contact, headphones on, and then, he was gone. Transferred mid-semester. No one asked why. Back then, Layla had been a freshman herself, naive, scared, privileged. She assumed it was a misunderstanding, maybe even deserved. But now, with hindsight and Braxton's story in full light, she realized what she'd witnessed. A pattern, a system, a predator hiding behind tenure and tradition. It was time to speak. She composed the email carefully, every sentence trembling under the weight of what she was about to reveal. Subject: I owe you more than silence. Braxton, I don't expect forgiveness, but I can't stay quiet anymore. I was the one who recorded the video. But there's more you need to know. Can we talk? Layla. She didn't expect a reply. Not with the world pulling Braxton in every direction. But less than an hour later, her phone buzzed. "Let's meet, tomorrow. 3 p.m. The old humanities quad bench." When she arrived the next day, Braxton was already there, hood pulled up, notebook in hand, eyes scanning the campus like he was still measuring who might be listening. He looked older than she remembered, not in age, but in weight. like someone who had outlived his own innocence. He didn't speak first. He just nodded, letting her carry the burden she had come to unload. "I'm sorry," she began, voice cracking. "I should have come forward earlier. I should have stood with you when it mattered." Braxton looked at her, not with anger, but with quiet expectation. "Why now?" She sat beside him, unsure if she even deserved to. "Because I saw what they did to you, and I remembered someone else. Someone they did it to before you." And then she told him everything. About Avery. About that moment in class. About how Landon humiliated him so deeply that he withdrew from the university weeks later. About how it had been swept under the rug just like they tried to do with Braxton. She had gone back into her student email archives and found an old group chat message, one that proved Avery had filed a complaint and nothing had come of it. Buried, just like Braxton's almost was. Braxton listened without interruption, but his silence was filled with fire. "Why didn't you say something before?" he asked finally, his tone low but piercing. Layla didn't flinch. "Because I was scared, and because I could afford to be. I'm white. I had the luxury of letting it go. But you didn't, and that's not fair." He nodded slowly. "Not in forgiveness, but in understanding. I want to help," she said. "Not for me, for him, for you, for all of us." The next week, she filed a formal affidavit with the university, including her recollection of the Avery Mitchell incident, the group chat logs, and her personal admission of inaction. She attached it to the original video in testimony about the administration's cover-up. Braxton co-signed it. Together they submitted it to an independent academic justice panel, funded by a coalition of civil rights groups and educators. What followed was swift and seismic. A national outlet picked up the affidavit. Headlines spread. "Second student comes forward in Milton State racism scandal." Avery Mitchell, now living in Chicago and running a nonprofit for underserved youth, gave a rare interview confirming everything Layla had said. "I didn't speak back then," he told reporters, "because I thought it would cost me everything. I see now, it cost me anyway." Other former students began to reach out. Anonymous stories flooded the inbox of the panel. Accusations that Landon had mocked, belittled, and quietly pushed out students for years. Always students of color. His record had been pristine only because it had been protected. Now, it was unraveling. The pressure forced the university into a corner. What had started as an isolated incident had ballooned into a systemic indictment. Their internal response would not just reflect on Landon, but on the entire institution's handling of race and power. Faculty split into factions. Some demanded transparency and accountability. Others circled the wagons, worried about donor fallout. Then came the university's announcement. Braxton and Layla sat side by side watching the live stream. The university president, flanked by legal advisors and trustees, read from a prepared statement. "Effective immediately," she said, "Milton State University is launching a full, independent investigation into past faculty misconduct related to racially motivated incidents, including those brought to light by Mr. Braxton Cole and Ms. Layla Hargrove. The university extends its deepest apologies to any student affected. We failed you, and we are changing." The screen went black. Braxton sat frozen, heart pounding. It was more than he expected, but it wasn't the end. Because change, he knew, didn't come from apologies. It came from what followed. And then his phone buzzed. A blocked number. He let it go to voicemail. But the message it left chilled him. "Think you won?" the voice said. "We taught you how to speak, but don't forget who built the classroom." After a century of denial, one student's courage forces a giant to kneel. The day began with gray skies over Milton State University, as if the sky itself hesitated to witness what was about to unfold. The school that had once tried to erase Braxton Cole's voice was now preparing to elevate it. Publicly, formally, and for the first time in its 14-year history, with a sense of accountability that could no longer be dodged. The announcement came through official channels, a live televised address by the university president, with trustees, faculty, students, and national media in attendance. Word spread like electricity. Cameras were installed on campus lawns, stages set under white tents, microphones clipped, statements rehearsed. It was more than ceremony. It was surrender. Inside her modest living room, Sharon Cole sat in front of the television, one hand gripping a coffee cup that had long gone cold. Her son, Braxton, sat beside her in silence, staring at the screen like it was a battlefield. No victory ever came easy. not when the scars were still fresh. When the feed cut to the podium, the university president stood rigid in a gray suit. Her eyes, sharp behind thin glasses, scanned the crowd before she began. "Today," she said, her voice steady but heavy, "Milton State University formally apologizes to Mr. Braxton Cole for the racial bias, public humiliation and institutional negligence he experienced while under our care." Gasps rippled through the audience. For over a century, the university had sidestepped every accusation of systemic racism. Today, that wall cracked wide open. "We acknowledge," she continued, "that the culture within certain departments, including the silence of leadership, enabled harm to be inflicted upon students of color. That harm ends now." A hush swept through the field. She listed a series of actions: launching a new $2 million scholarship fund in Braxton Cole's name for Black students pursuing linguistics and education, immediate review and overhaul of hiring and tenure policies for faculty, mandatory anti-bias and racial sensitivity training for all staff, with Braxton's story featured as required material for incoming faculty, curriculum updates across departments to address cultural language bias, an independent racial equity board led by national experts, including Dr. Myra Stanton. The camera cut to Braxton, sitting near the front, calm but unmoved. After the address, the president stepped down and approached him, extending a folder, his formal letter of apology. He took it quietly. Later that evening, during a press conference, Braxton stood before a room full of reporters. His tone was measured, firm. "I accept this apology," he said, "not for me, but for the students who never got one, for Avery Mitchell, for the ones who transferred, for the ones who dropped out, for the ones who stopped speaking altogether." He paused. "But I decline the monetary compensation offered to me personally, because money doesn't dismantle systems. Reform does. And if the university means what it says, the true test won't be this week. It'll be every semester after." Applause broke out, not polite but passionate. By the end of the week, the story was everywhere. Milton State issues historic apology to student after racial profiling scandal. Hashtags returned. Braxton Speaks trended again. Activists praised him. Critics quieted. Legislators began using his story as a blueprint for educational reform across state lines. But for Braxton, none of it felt like an ending. He walked the campus at dusk, notebook in hand, hoodie up, heart heavy with questions. What did real justice even look like? Was it a speech? A policy? Or simply the right to walk and not look over your shoulder? He had thought this moment would feel like triumph. Instead, it felt like release, like exhaling something you held for too long. That night, after the interviews and ceremonies were done, Braxton returned to his dorm. The room was quiet, bathed in the soft hum of the desk lamp. He sat, reached into his bag and pulled out the envelope the president had handed him. He hadn't opened it yet. Inside, typed on official university letterhead, were the words, "Dear Mr. Cole, on behalf of the institution I represent, I offer our deepest apologies." But he stopped reading. His phone had buzzed. A new email. No subject line. No sender name. Just a timestamp. He opened it. There was no message. Just an attachment. He hesitated, then clicked. A scanned document appeared on screen. His eyes widened. It was an internal email between two senior administrators, dated 2 days before the public apology. "We give him what he wants. Let him think he won. It'll blow over. He's just a student. Eventually they all fade." Braxton leaned back, blood draining from his face. They hadn't meant the apology. They hadn't meant any of it. The speech, the money, the policies. It was a performance. And now he had proof. The question was no longer about healing. It was about exposing what still rotted beneath the surface, and whether the world would believe him again. Braxton Cole's name now lived in places that once seemed unreachable. Textbooks, academic journals, keynote panels, but nothing prepared him for the email that arrived late one autumn morning, with a subject line that stopped him cold. Smithsonian Cultural Archives, Acceptance. He read it 3 times before it sank in. His essay, The Color of Sound, the same one born from pain, defiance and truth, was being formally inducted into the Smithsonian's collection on American cultural history. It would sit beside speeches by Martin Luther King Jr., writings from Toni Morrison, James Baldwin, and Maya Angelou. A boy once laughed at for the way he spoke, had now etched his voice into the nation's permanent memory. The official ceremony in D.C. was small but powerful. Curators, historians, linguists, and journalists gathered to witness the unveiling. Sharon stood beside her son, eyes wet with pride, clutching his arm like a mother anchoring a comet. The director spoke with reverence. "Mr. Cole, your work did not just spark a conversation, it redefined how we understand voice, identity, and education in America." That evening, Braxton visited a local high school, where he had been invited to sit in on a class reading of The Color of Sound. As he entered the room, a group of 11th graders stood to greet him, holding printed pages. Their accents varied: Southern, Northern, Caribbean, even immigrant English, but none of them tried to hide their voice. They read his words with pride. One boy said, "I thought I was wrong for how I talk. Now I know I'm rich in sound." Braxton smiled, heartful. "Your voice is your inheritance," he told them. "Don't let anyone bankrupt it." His calendar filled with invitations, but not the flashy kind. These were intentional: policy roundtables, education equity commissions, workshops for teachers. He began speaking before Congress on language discrimination, curriculum reform, and systemic racism in classrooms. His words, once mocked, now shaped legislation. One day, as he stepped into the Capitol for a hearing, Sharon waited in the audience. She watched her son stand before lawmakers and define the intersection of identity and education with clarity and conviction. For years, she had feared the spotlight would crush him, but now she realized it had revealed him. A few months later, an envelope arrived in Braxton's mailbox. The crest on it made him blink. It was from Milton State. Inside was a formal invitation to accept an honorary doctorate in cultural literacy and justice. He stared at the paper for a long time. The same institution that once threatened to expel him for writing too well, now wanted to honor his work. He thought of Professor Landon, long gone, resigned in disgrace. He thought of Layla, of Avery, of all the students who never had the chance to finish what he now represented. He accepted. The ceremony took place in the same auditorium where he had first been humiliated. But this time, the audience stood when he walked in. Faculty, press, community leaders. The university president pinned the medal to his robe. "We were wrong," she said quietly, just for him to hear. "And now, we build something better." When Braxton took the podium, he didn't speak from a script. "I'm not here because I wanted to prove myself. I'm here because I refuse to lose myself. And if this institution can change, then maybe others can too." He paused. Let the silence sit. We don't fix history by erasing it. We fix it by learning from it and writing something new. As he left the stage, applause still echoing, a young black girl, no more than 9, rushed to him from the crowd. Her pigtails bounced as she looked up. "They laugh at me too," she said shyly. "Can I write like you?" Braxton knelt to her level, eyes kind. "You won't write like me," he said. "You'll write something better." And as he rose, the world finally quieted, not because they stopped speaking, but because they started listening. If you've ever been silenced for simply being yourself, if you've ever watched someone brave enough to speak truth get punished instead of praised, then you know this isn't just Braxton's story. It's all of ours. Type yes if you believe